day my world shattered was like any other. I came home early, hoping to surprise my wife with her favorite flowers. But instead of the joy I expected, I walked into a scene that no husband should ever witness. My wife, my partner of 10 years, the woman I had built my life around, was in the arms of my best friend. The betrayal was like a dagger straight to the heart. At first, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. But as the initial shock wore off, something dark and determined took over. This wasn't just about infidelity. It was about the sheer audacity of their betrayal. They thought they could destroy me and walk away unscathed. But they didn't know me as well as they thought. If life had taught me anything, it was to never show your cards until the game was over. And in this game, I was about to make the most calculated, devastating move of my life. I still remember the day I met her like it was yesterday. It was a crisp autumn afternoon, the kind where the leaves painted the ground in shades of gold and crimson. I was running late for a business seminar, juggling a briefcase and a coffee cup, when I bumped into her. Literally. My coffee spilled all over her jacket. I apologized profusely, and she laughed it off with the warmest smile I'd ever seen. She introduced herself as Clara, a marketing professional attending the same seminar. We spent the next hour talking during the event, and by the end of it, I was completely captivated. Clara was intelligent, charming, and had an infectious laugh that lit up the room. We exchanged numbers, and one coffee date turned into many. Before I knew it, we were inseparable. Our relationship blossomed quickly. A year later, on a quiet beach under a starlit sky, I proposed with a trembling hand and a heart full of hope. When she said yes, it felt like the beginning of a fairy tale. Our wedding was a small but magical affair. Surrounded by close friends and family, we promised to stand by each other through thick and thin. Little did I know, the very foundation of that promise would crumble years later, shaking everything I believed in. For years, I believed we had the perfect marriage. Clara and I shared countless memories, celebrated milestones, and faced life's challenges together. But over time, subtle changes began to creep into our relationship. She became distant, her phone always seemed to be glued to her hand, and there were nights she claimed to be working late. I wanted to believe her, I really did. But deep down, a gnawing suspicion began to grow. The truth hit me like a freight train one fateful evening. Clara had mentioned she'd be attending a work meeting out of town. Something about her tone didn't sit right with me, so I decided to follow her. My heart raced as I trailed her car, my palms sweaty on the steering wheel. She pulled into a hotel parking lot, and moments later, my best friend, Mark, showed up. I watched in stunned silence as they greeted each other with an intimacy that shattered every illusion I had about my life. They laughed, held hands, and disappeared into the hotel together. My stomach churned, and for a moment, I thought I might vomit. The two people I trusted most in the world were betraying me in the worst possible way. I sat in my car for what felt like hours, anger and heartbreak warring within me. But then something clicked. Crying wouldn't solve anything, and wallowing in self-pity wasn't my style. If they were playing games, it was time for me to change the rules. That night, I didn't just decide to confront them. I decided to destroy them. Once the initial shock of the betrayal wore off, I knew my revenge had to be methodical. Confronting Clara and Mark immediately would have been satisfying in the moment, but it wouldn't have been enough. I wanted to hit them where it hurt the most: Mark's wife, Sophie, and the empire they built together. Sophie was an intelligent and accomplished woman who managed her own successful company. She had always been kind to Clara and me, often hosting us for dinners and celebrations. I knew that targeting Mark's life through Sophie would not only avenge their betrayal, but also give me an opportunity to strike at the foundation of his personal and professional success. The first step was to get close to Sophie without arousing suspicion. I reached out to her under the guise of needing advice. I told her I was considering expanding my own business ventures and admired her success. To my relief, she was warm and receptive. We began meeting for coffee and lunches to discuss business strategies, and soon, a professional camaraderie began to form. As I spent more time with Sophie, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Her quiet elegance, the way she spoke with conviction, and her sharp wit began to draw me in. I reminded myself that this was part of the plan, but a small part of me started to feel something I hadn't expected: genuine admiration. To truly gain her trust, I revealed part of the truth. I told her I had reason to believe Clara and Mark might be involved in something inappropriate. I didn't give her details, but expressed my concern and heartbreak. Sophie's eyes widened, and for a moment I saw a flicker of doubt cross her face. She promised to look into it discreetly, and I knew I had planted the first seed of distrust. With every interaction, Sophie began to confide in me as well. She revealed that Mark had been distant lately, often making excuses to stay out late or leave town. I listened intently, offering support while carefully nudging her suspicions further. The cracks in their marriage were beginning to show, and I was right there to help them widen. As I spent more time with Sophie, I couldn't deny the growing feelings inside me. What had begun as a calculated revenge plot was slowly turning into something far more complicated. Sophie's vulnerability, her kindness, and her strength, it all resonated with me in ways I never anticipated. The tipping point came one evening, after another of our late-night meetings. We'd been discussing her company's future over a bottle of wine at a quiet restaurant when the conversation took a personal turn. Sophie shared that she felt isolated, betrayed by Mark's recent behavior. The more she spoke, the more I saw the cracks in her own heart, the same pain I had experienced. I knew she was struggling, and somewhere deep inside, I began to feel something that went beyond just revenge. "I don't know who I can trust anymore," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I thought Mark and I had everything, but now I'm not so sure." Her words hung in the air, and before I could stop myself, I reached across the table and gently took her hand. She didn't pull away. Her eyes met mine, and in that moment, I knew I had to act. "I know what it feels like to have your world shattered," I replied softly. "And I'm here for you, Sophie. You don't have to go through this alone." Her expression softened, and she squeezed my hand in return. There was a brief silence between us, the kind where words weren't necessary. We both understood what was happening, but neither of us wanted to admit it. Later that night, I offered to drive her home, but she hesitated. Sophie wasn't just looking for comfort, she was seeking something more. As we arrived at her house, the atmosphere between us was charged. She looked at me, searching my face as if trying to decide something. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She leaned in, and our lips met in a kiss that felt like it had been a long time coming. It was tender, yet urgent, as though we both knew we were crossing a line we couldn't uncross. We didn't speak much after that. We didn't need to. The night unfolded in a blur of shared confessions, lost inhibitions, and a sense of recklessness. I had her in my arms, and for the first time in what felt like ages, I wasn't thinking about revenge. I was just lost in the moment with her. The next morning, I woke up next to Sophie, my head spinning from what had happened. I hadn't planned for any of it, but in a way, it felt inevitable. We had crossed the line, and there was no going back. I knew one thing for sure. I had achieved more than just revenge. I had gained something I hadn't expected, the woman I had grown to admire, to care for. But the cost? The cost was yet to be revealed. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. Sophie and I continued to meet in secret, our connection growing deeper with each passing day. What began as a betrayal of trust was now a passionate affair, one that I knew was only going to end in one way: me taking everything from them, my wife, and my best friend. But as with all secrets, it was only a matter of time before they came to light. Neither Sophie nor I were naive enough to think we could keep our relationship hidden forever, but we had hoped for a little more time. We never intended for anyone to find out. Still, the web of lies we were spinning had to unravel at some point. It happened sooner than expected. Clara, my wife, had always been a sharp woman, but I never thought she'd catch on this quickly. She had been suspicious of my growing distance, my late nights at work, and my increasingly cold demeanor. She had no concrete proof, but her instincts were sharper than I'd given her credit for. One evening, I came home late, hoping to avoid any confrontation, but as soon as I stepped through the door, I found Clara standing in the living room, a cold, hard look in her eyes. "I know," she said quietly, "about you and Sophie." My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't expected her to know, not yet. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. Clara had always been perceptive, and in that moment, I realized that no matter how careful I had been, I had underestimated her. "How long?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. "Clara?" I began, but she cut me off. "Don't," she said, her eyes flashing with a combination of hurt and rage. "I know everything. Sophie told me herself." Sophie had been the one to crack first. After our affair became something more serious, she couldn't keep the weight of the guilt on her shoulders any longer. She had confessed to Mark, her husband, in a moment of weakness. She had told him about our secret relationship, unable to bear the deception any longer. When Mark found out, he confronted me immediately. The betrayal wasn't just in my marriage anymore. It had extended to our friendship. The very person I thought I could trust had been just as dishonest as Clara had been. He was furious, heartbroken, and filled with rage, but in his own way, he respected me. He didn't want to ruin Sophie's life further, but he knew the damage had already been done. By the time everything came to light, the situation had spiraled out of control. Clara, furious beyond belief, immediately demanded a divorce. Mark and I stopped speaking, but I knew our friendship was over. The realization settled in. There was no going back. The day I sat down to speak with Clara was one I'll never forget. The weight of what I had done, the destruction of everything I had once held dear, was heavy on my chest. But I knew that this conversation had to happen, and the truth had to come out. Clara, still reeling from the betrayal, had no idea how deep it ran. She had suspected something, but she had no idea how far I'd gone. I couldn't hold back anymore. I had to tell her everything, not just about the affair, but about what had led me to it. I had to make her understand that my actions weren't born out of a whim. They were born out of the very thing she had done to me. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, my hands trembling. I watched her closely, her eyes still filled with the sting of betrayal. She didn't say a word, but her silence spoke volumes. "Clara," I began, my voice hoarse, "I'm not proud of what I did, but I'm not going to apologize either. Not for what happened between me and Sophie." Her eyes widened, and her lips trembled as if she were about to speak, but she remained silent, waiting for me to continue. "I didn't just cheat because I wanted to. I did it because you cheated first," I said, each word cutting through the air. "I saw you with Mark. I watched the two of you together. And when I found out about your affair, I couldn't just stand by and let it happen." I could see the realization hit her like a tidal wave. She looked away, struggling to hold herself together. Her face twisted with a mix of anger and sorrow. "Did you ever think about us?" she whispered, her voice breaking. "I did," I replied, my heart heavy but resolute. "But in the end, it was never really about us anymore. It was about you breaking the trust we built, and I couldn't live with that." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but I wasn't moved. I had given her everything, my love, my trust, and my loyalty, and she had thrown it all away. I had nothing left to give. "I'm divorcing you, Clara," I said firmly. "I'm done with this. I can't stay in this toxic mess any longer." She stared at me, devastated, but she knew deep down that there was no coming back from this. The damage had been done, and she had no one to blame but herself. But the story didn't end there. Sophie, after confessing everything to Mark, had done the same thing I had. She chose to break free. She realized that she couldn't continue living a lie with Mark. The truth had been exposed, and their marriage had crumbled just as mine had. Sophie and Mark were no longer together, and Sophie, too, had decided to start anew, just as I had. It wasn't long after that Sophie and I found ourselves together in the same broken place. Two people who had lost everything but had gained each other in the process. We had both destroyed our marriages to build something new, something real. In the end, I didn't just get revenge on Clara and Mark. I got a fresh start with someone who understood the depths of betrayal as well as I did. Sophie and I weren't just rebuilding our lives. We were rebuilding trust in a way we had never experienced before. As the dust settled and the aftermath of the divorces took shape, Sophie and I found ourselves standing side by side, not as enemies, but as two people who had been through the fires of betrayal and emerged from them with a new understanding of what it meant to love, trust, and rebuild. Our relationship was no longer just about revenge. It had grown into something real, something deeper. The lines between pain and healing blurred, and we found solace in each other's company. The woman I had once plotted against was now the woman I was committed to. We understood each other in ways no one else could, but even though we had found something beautiful in the wreckage of our pasts, we both knew that it wasn't going to be easy. We carried the weight of our previous lives with us. Ghosts of Mark and Clara lingered, and sometimes those memories would resurface, threatening to pull us back into the bitterness we had worked so hard to escape. But we weren't the same people we had been when all of this began. Sophie, who once had a perfectly curated life with Mark, now saw the value in freedom and self-discovery. And I, who had once been consumed by revenge, had learned the hard way that true peace came from letting go of the past, no matter how painful it was. We spent the months following our divorces getting to know each other on a deeper level. We traveled together, explored new places, and rebuilt our lives from the ground up. The company Sophie had once shared with Mark became hers alone, and we worked together to ensure its success. It wasn't easy, but the work we put into it felt rewarding because we were doing it together. Slowly but surely, we began to plan for a future that was ours. We discussed everything: the life we wanted, the family we dreamed of, and the lessons we had learned from our previous marriages. We knew we had a long road ahead, but we were willing to walk it side by side, building something new, something that would be stronger than the broken foundations we had left behind. The love we shared wasn't without its scars. We had both been hurt in ways that no one could truly understand, but somehow, in each other, we had found the strength to heal. And I knew, with every passing day, that I had made the right choice. I had taken revenge on Clara and Mark, but I had also gained something far more valuable: someone who loved me for who I was, not for who I had once been. Sophie and I were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, and for the first time in a long time, I felt truly at peace. Sophie and I, together, embarked on a new chapter. A chapter that was built not on the foundation of past mistakes, but on lessons learned, growth, and the hard truths we both had come to accept. We had taken the path of betrayal and revenge, and while it had cost us everything we once knew, our marriages, our friendships, and the lives we had carefully built, it had also brought us closer than we ever imagined. Living with the consequences of our actions wasn't easy. Every day was a reminder of the choices we had made, choices that had shattered the lives of others, Clara's, Mark's, and even our own. There were moments when I would think about the destruction that had been left in the wake of my decisions, and I couldn't help but feel the weight of it all. But Sophie and I were building something new. We were making a life for ourselves, and in time, we both realized that despite everything, we had earned this second chance. Clara, now far removed from my life, had never truly recovered from the divorce. She had tried to rebuild, to move on, but the damage was too deep. She had lost me, and in a way, she had lost herself. Her life, like mine, was left in pieces, but while I had found healing with Sophie, Clara continued to dwell in the bitterness of her betrayal, never fully acknowledging what she had done to me. Mark, on the other hand, took the same path as his wife. He had always been a man of pride, and he couldn't handle the truth of what Sophie and I had done. He distanced himself from me, from everyone, and threw himself into his work, avoiding any reminders of the past. But the cracks in his life were visible to anyone who looked closely. His betrayal had cost him more than just his marriage. It had cost him a part of his soul, something that could never be fully repaired. And then there was me, the man who had sought revenge, who had planned every move, who had destroyed everything in his path to feel justice. But in the end, the one thing that was hardest to come by was peace. Revenge had given me satisfaction, but it hadn't brought healing. The healing came when I realized that my life was no longer defined by what had happened to me. It was defined by the future I chose to create. Sophie and I had rebuilt something from the wreckage of our past. We had created a life that was ours, one where the past no longer controlled us. We traveled, explored new dreams, and built our business together. And though we would never forget the lives we had torn apart, we were determined to make this new chapter one filled with love, respect, and hope for a better future. But even now, there are days when I look back and realize the true cost of what I did. The pain, the loss, and the wreckage left behind are things I can never fully undo. Yet, in the midst of it all, I know one thing for sure. I'm not that same man anymore. The man who sought revenge is gone. The man sitting here now, alongside Sophie, is a man who has learned to forgive, not just others, but himself too. As for Sophie, she is no longer the woman caught in the middle of her own deceit. She's a woman who has learned to embrace her new life, just as I have learned to embrace mine. And though our journey together began in a way no one would ever wish for, it's a journey we now walk with our heads held high. In the end, the destruction was inevitable, but so was the rebuilding. Together, Sophie and I forged a new path, one that will forever be shaped by the choices we made, but also by the love and the lessons that came from it. And as we look to the future, we know that the past, though it will always remain a part of us, no longer has the power to define us. Thank you for watching, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do so and press the notification bell. This way, you'll stay updated with more shocking real-life stories.